Here's something nobody is telling you. The people who are waiting right now, waiting for rates to come down before they buy a home, they're not being foolish. They're not being impatient. They're actually doing exactly what they were told to do. The problem is what they were told. Because right now there is a piece of advice circulating on YouTube, in your realtor's office, in financial Facebook groups, and probably in your family group chat. And that advice is costing people, real, specific people. I can show you math on somewhere between $30,000 and $150,000 in lifetime wealth. And the scary part, the advice sounds completely reasonable. It sounds almost smart. That's what makes it dangerous. Here's the advice. Wait for rates to drop. Prices are too high. Rates are too high. Just wait. The market will cool and you'll get a better deal. Now, if you've heard that recently, or if you've said that to yourself, I need you to stay here for the next few minutes. Because I spent 2 weeks running the actual math, not the version that always says buy, not the version that always says wait, the real version, the one that asks a question almost nobody asks. What would the world actually have to look like for waiting to be the right move? And when I answer that honestly, something uncomfortable comes out. So let me show you exactly what I found. And more importantly, I'm going to show you how to run this on your own situation, in your own market, so you're not just borrowing someone else's answer. Let me give you the context for why we're even having this conversation today. 2 days ago, literally 2 days ago, as I'm filming this, Fannie Mae walked back its mortgage rate forecast for the second time this year. They had been projecting rates would drop to around 6% by end of year. The new forecast, 6.4% through the first quarter of 2027. That means anyone who started waiting for rates in 2022 thinking, just give it 6 months, they're now in year 4 of waiting, and rates are higher than when they started. Now I want to be clear about something. This is not a video about whether you should buy a home. I don't know your situation. I don't know your market, your income, your job stability, or whether you even want to own right now. Those things matter enormously, and anyone who tells you always buy without knowing those things is selling you something. This video is about something more specific, the strategy called waiting for rates to drop. Because that strategy rests on assumptions, and those assumptions have a track record, and the track record is not what the advice sounds like it should be. Here's the framework I'm going to use for this whole video. Any financial decision you make is a bet. Every bet has conditions. And the question you should always be asking is, what would have to be true for this bet to pay off? Most people who are waiting for rates can't answer that question. They're not waiting strategically. They're waiting hopefully, and those are very different things. Let me show you the difference. When you decide to wait for mortgage rates to drop before buying, you're not making one bet. You're stacking 3 bets on top of each other, and almost every piece of advice you'll find online only talks about the first one. Bet number 1, that home prices won't rise significantly while you wait. This is the one that does the most damage, and it's the one that almost nobody talks about. Here's why it's so important. When you wait, you're not just betting on rates moving in your favor. You're also betting that the thing you want to buy doesn't get more expensive while you're waiting. And historically, not always, but historically that's a hard bet to win. The National Home Price Index is up about 11% from mid-2022 to today. That's actually below the long-run historical average appreciation rate. The average appreciation over the past 50 years in the U.S. is around 4–5% per year, which compounds to something like 17–22% over 4 years. So 11% over this particular 4-year stretch, that's actually a slow cycle. Let's put numbers on that. Say you were eyeing a $400,000 house in 2022. At the national average appreciation rate, that same house is now worth somewhere around $444,000. That's $44,000 more. On a 20% down payment, that means your down payment requirement also went up, and you're now financing a larger loan at whatever rate is available today. Here's the thing about that. The interest savings from a meaningful rate drop on your original loan size can get completely wiped out by a price increase on the underlying asset. If a half-point rate drop saves you $100 a month, and that's actually a meaningful rate drop, it would take over 36 years for those savings to add up to $44,000 in price appreciation. And that's before we talk about what you paid in rent during the wait. Now, and this is important, some markets don't appreciate like that. Some markets in Texas and Florida actually saw price declines over portions of this period. So this isn't a universal law. Your specific market matters enormously. But at the national level, the data is clear. Counting on prices to stay flat or fall while you wait is the weakest part of the waiting strategy, and it's the part almost nobody puts a number on. Bet number 2, that rates will actually drop enough on a timeline you can live with. Here's something worth understanding about the historical record on rate movements. If you look at every year since 1971, where the 30-year fixed rate was in the range we're in now between about 5.5% and 7.5%, and you ask, how often did rates drop a full percentage point within the next 24 months? The answer is roughly 23% of the time. That's not zero. Rates do fall. They fell hard from 1981 through 1986. They came down through the 90s. They fell after 2008. They crashed during COVID. But notice something. Even in the optimistic version of this bet, you're looking at waiting up to 2 years for the move you're expecting. And that's in the scenarios where it happens at all. Now there's a second layer here. Even if rates drop, they need to drop enough to actually make a difference. A quarter-point drop doesn't change much. A half-point drop doesn't change much. The actual savings on a monthly payment from a quarter-point drop on a $350,000 loan is about $50 a month. That's real, but it's not the life-changing number people are imagining when they say, wait for rates to drop. The rate drop that people are actually hoping for, the one that materially changes the math, is typically a full percentage point or more. And right now, in June 2026, with Fannie Mae projecting 6.4% through Cone 2027, nobody credible is forecasting that kind of move within the next 12 months. Which brings us to the third bet, and this one is the sneaky one. Bet number 3, that when rates fall, the refinance math will actually work out. This one's for everyone who took the buy now and refinance later version of this advice in 2022 or 2023. And there are a lot of people in this situation. Refinancing is not free. Closing costs on a refinance typically run between 2% and 5% of the new loan amount. On a $350,000 loan, you're looking at somewhere between $7,000 and $17,500 in fees. Sometimes you can roll those into the loan, but that just means you're financing your closing costs over 30 years. So let's run the actual break-even math. Say someone bought in mid-2024 at 7%. They refinance today at 6.5%. That's a half-point drop. On a $350,000 loan, their old payment was around $2,329. New payment is around $2,212. Monthly savings, $117. Closing costs at 3%, $10,500. Divide $10,500 by $117 and you get 89 months. That's nearly 7.5 years just to break even. The industry rule of thumb has always been that you need roughly a full percentage point of drop, and you need to stay in the home long enough for the savings to cover the costs. If you sell in 5 years, which the median American homeowner does, a half-point refi can actually cost you money net. The date the rate pitch doesn't tell you that. It just says rates will come down. It doesn't do the break-even math for your specific loan on your specific timeline. 3 bets stacked on top of each other, each one uncertain on its own. All 3 have to go your way at roughly the same time. So what does the data say about people who made all 3 of those bets in 2022? Let me walk you through a real scenario, not a hypothetical, the actual maths. 2 people, same neighborhood, same starting point. June 2022. There's a 3-bedroom house on the market at $385,000. The rate that week is 5.8%. Both have 20% down, $77,000 ready to go. Person A buys, person B decides to wait for rates to drop just 6 months, they say. That was 4 years ago. Let's run person A's 4 years first. Person A bought at $385,000 at 5.8%, loan of $308,000, monthly principal and interest, $1,807. Over 48 months, total payments into the loan, $86,736. Of that, about $69,500 went to interest. About $17,200 reduced the principal. Loan balance is now roughly $290,800. Property taxes and insurance averaged over 4 years, about $6,300 a year, so $25,200 total. Total money out the door, about $112,000. But here's what person A got for that $112,000. The house, at national average appreciation, is now worth around $428,000. They owe $290,800. Their equity position, what they'd walk away with if they sold today, is roughly $137,200. That includes their original $77,000 down payment, still intact in the form of equity, about $17,200 in principal they paid down, and about $43,000 in appreciation value the market gave them just for owning. Now person B, who waited. They kept renting, started at $1,850 a month in 2022. Got hit with rent increases that tracked the rental market, around 8% the first year, then 5.5%, then 4%, then 3.5%. Over 4 years, total rent paid, roughly $97,700. That money is gone, zero equity behind it. But and this is the charitable version of person B's story. Their $77,000 down payment sat in a high-yield savings account earning around 4.5% blended. It grew to about $91,700, so they gained around $14,700 in interest, real money. Here's the problem. Person B picks up the phone today and calls the listing agent. The same house just came back on the market. The price is $428,000. 20% down is now $85,600. They have just barely enough. New loan, $342,400. Today's rate, 6.4%. Monthly payment, $2,140. That's $333 more per month than person A has been paying for the entire remaining life of a 30-year loan. Over the life of the loan, person B pays roughly $120,000 more in total payments than person A for the exact same house. Now let's knit it out properly, apples to apples. Person A, $137,200 in equity, having spent about $112,000 in housing costs. Person B, $91,700 in liquid savings, having spent about $97,700 in rent. Net the two positions today, person A is ahead by roughly $33,000 and counting, and locks in a payment that's $333 cheaper every single month for the next 30 years. Person B wasn't reckless, they were cautious. They followed the conventional wisdom. The math just didn't cooperate. But here's the question I want to sit with for a moment. Don't just ask who won, ask what would the world have needed to look like for person B to come out ahead. Because this is the question you should be asking about your own situation right now. Let's run the scenario backwards. For person B to break even on prices alone, home prices would have needed to fall, not stay flat, actually decline by about 3% over 4 years, at a time when the national index rose 11%. That's a 14 percentage point gap between what needed to happen and what actually happened. In some markets, parts of Austin, some Florida metros, prices did pull back slightly. But nationally, the waiting strategy didn't need prices to cool, it needed them to drop. They went the other direction. For person B to break even on monthly payment, meaning for the lower rate today to cancel out the higher price, what rate would they need today? Run the math. What rate on $342,400 produces the same monthly payment as person A's $1,807 on $308,000 at 5.8%? The answer is 4.9%, a full 1.5 percentage points below today's market rate, and we're not even close to that. Fannie Mae just pushed its forecast up to 6.4% through early 2027. And even if rates somehow hit 4.9% tomorrow, which would require an economic shock on par with the pandemic or a major financial crisis, person B has already paid $97,700 in rent with nothing to show for it. The lower rate just gets them to a tie on the monthly payment going forward. It doesn't recover the rent, the missed appreciation, or the 4 years of equity building they sat out. This is the honest version of the waiting strategy. You're not just betting that rates will come down. You're betting that rates come down a lot fast and that prices either fell or stayed flat while you waited, and that you can execute the refinance cleanly before you sell or move. The probability of any one of those three things going your way is uncertain. The probability of all three going your way at the same time is meaningfully lower. And the cost of being wrong isn't symmetric. Every month of waiting is rent paid with no equity accumulating. That cost doesn't undo itself, it compounds in the wrong direction. I want to be careful here. I don't want this to be a buying always wins video. That's lazy. That's also occasionally wrong. So let me give you the scenarios where waiting is genuinely the smarter move. Scenario 1, you're in a market that is genuinely overvalued and historically corrects. Not all markets appreciate the same way. There are pockets of the country and markets in other countries entirely where real estate has historically been more volatile, more prone to speculative bubbles, and more likely to give back gains in downturns. If you're in a coastal metro that saw 40% plus price gains in 2020-2022 on top of already high prices, the math on appreciation looks different than if you're in a mid-sized Midwestern market with steady, boring 3% annual growth. Know your market's specific history. Don't use national averages to make a local decision. Scenario 2, your personal financial foundation isn't stable enough to absorb the risk of ownership. Buying a home with a tight emergency fund, an unstable income, or debt that could be called in is genuinely risky. A job loss plus homeownership in a market that dips is a much worse outcome than renting while getting financially stronger. Waiting while you actually fix your financial position is not the same as waiting and hoping for rates to fall. One is a strategy, the other is a wish. Scenario 3, you're about to move within 2-3 years anyway. Transaction costs on buying and selling a home run roughly 8-10% of the home's value when you add realtor fees, closing costs, and moving expenses. If you're not going to be in a home for at least 3-5 years, buying can genuinely cost you more than renting, even in an appreciating market. The break-even timeline for transaction costs is real, don't ignore it. Scenario 4, you have specific reasons to believe your local market will correct. Not general vibes. Specific data, rising inventory, falling days on market, job losses in the primary employer, a local supply glut about to hit. If you can point to actual market indicators, not just "it feels expensive," waiting can be justified. The key thing all of these have in common, they're specific reasons based on your market and your situation, not a general vibe that rates feel too high. Hope is not a condition. It feels expensive is not a strategy. So what should you actually do if you're in the market right now? Here's the framework I'd use. It takes about 20 minutes and it will give you more clarity than 6 months of watching rate forecasts. Step 1, write down the conditions your waiting strategy requires. Not vibes, conditions, specifically. What rate are you waiting for, not lower an actual number? What price are you hoping to pay, not cheaper a number? How long are you prepared to wait, not until it makes sense a month and year? What do you think will happen to home prices in your specific market during that wait, by how much and why? If you can't fill in those blanks, you're not waiting strategically, you're waiting hopefully. Step 2, check whether that combination has historically happened. This is the honest part. If you're waiting for a 1.5-point rate drop within 12 months in a market with strong employment and limited housing inventory, look at the historical record. That combination has happened, but rarely and usually during severe economic downturns that also tend to create job instability, which affects your ability to qualify for a mortgage anyway. Step 3, run the opportunity cost. What are you paying in rent right now? Multiply that by the number of months you're prepared to wait. That's real money out the door with no equity behind it. It needs to be offset by whatever savings your waiting strategy actually produces, not what you hope it produces, what the math says it produces based on your specific numbers. Step 4, separate the rate decision from the house decision. These are two different questions, and conflating them causes bad thinking. The question, is this a good house for me in a location I want to be in for at least 5 years at a price I can actually afford on my income, is different from, is this a good interest rate environment? You can ask both questions, but make sure you're answering both honestly, not letting one override the other. And here's the thing, if the answer to the first question is yes, good house, right location, 5+ years, affordable payment, the rate question becomes much less important, because you're betting on the asset, not the rate. The rate is just the cost of borrowing to access the asset. It can be managed over time. The appreciation you miss while waiting cannot be recovered. Here's what I want you to take from this. The conventional wisdom on waiting for rates isn't evil. The people giving it aren't trying to mislead you. The strategy sounds reasonable because it is reasonable if you're betting on 3 specific conditions all going your way at once. The problem is that almost nobody checks whether those conditions are likely. They just assume the strategy is safe. And when the conditions don't hold, the cost is real and it doesn't reverse. The question worth carrying with you isn't, should I wait? The question is, what would have to be true for waiting to win? Write those conditions down, check them against history, check them against your specific market, and then decide whether you're making a bet you actually believe in or whether you're just hoping the math works out. Because hoping doesn't show up in the math, but the rent you paid for 4 years while you hoped, that absolutely does.